A bell tolls somewhere in the far hills, slow and hollow, as if rung by the hand of a ghost. In the valley below, the sun has barely risen. Mist clings to the fields like the breath of the dying. The earth is damp from a night of weeping fog, and every blade of grass holds the hush of mourning. A lone figure stands in the ruin of a monastery garden barefoot, pale, his cloak stiff with dried blood and mud. The stones beneath his feet are broken, overgrown. A crushed sprig of thyme lies beneath his heel. He does not move. His hands tremble as he crouches and reaches down. Gently, reverently, he lifts the herb between calloused fingers. The scent rises, subtle but sharp, and with it, memory. He is. Not here, not in this ruined place, not in this year where the trees bear silence instead of birdsong. For a moment, he is there, before. The warm kitchens of the infirmary. The soft voices of the brothers at dusk. Prayers drifting like threads of smoke. Bread rising in clay ovens. The scent of wax and lavender oil in the chapel. The flicker of candlelight across Brother Thomas Gentle's face. Then the warmth breaks. The memory dissolves like wax touched by flame. All gone now, all buried. They call him Elias, though few dare speak the name aloud anymore. It echoes like a curse in the mouths of the frightened, the marked, the last monk, the plague-touched, but none of those names carry the truth. Elias survived, yes, but not through miracle, through madness, through soil and fire, through the smell of rot clinging to his skin for months on end. He buried 87 brothers with his own hands. He dragged the bodies of children from their mother's arms, laid them in rows like broken dolls, and closed their eyes when no one else would. He anointed flesh that no longer looked human, held bones that still trembled from the agony of death. He did not pray for rescue. He prayed for the strength to keep digging. When the worst of it had passed, when the rats grew thin from famine and the wind no longer carried the wailing of townsfolk, Elias emerged from the cloister like a ghost unburied. His ribs shone through his habit. His hands shook from hunger, and yet he breathed. And that, they said, was the proof of his guilt. No one could witness so much death and live. Unless he had made a pact. Unless he had bargained with the shadows. They whispered of demons, of necromancy, of forbidden saints whose icons had long been hidden in catacombs. The church, already faltering under the weight of a broken Europe, looked to Elias and saw a question they could not afford to answer. So they answered it with fire. The Inquisition did not knock. It arrived in the night with chains and torches. No trial, no parchment, just a command: cleanse. But Elias was gone. He fled through the underbrush, through rivers thick with the unserved. We are lives thick with the ashes of burned hamlets. Children hid behind shutters at his passing. Old women crossed themselves in forgotten tongues. In some villages, they spat dot. In others, they wept and begged for his touch. For he was a ghost, but a ghost who healed. He carried no Bible, only a book of herbs and fevers, its cover cracked and stitched with sinew. He wrote in it with a crow's quill stolen from a convent, dipped in rust-dark blood when ink was scarce. The book was not sacred, but it was holy. It held the cures he had found when prayers failed. Sometimes, when the wind was kind and the stars did not scream, Elias would stop at a hovel, where the sick groaned behind crumbling walls. He would kneel. He would press cool linen to burning skin, whispering no Latin chants but soft, fractured things, a child's rhyme, a dead brother's name, a line from a psalm that no longer held meaning but still tasted of hope. He did not heal all. He did not even heal most, but he stayed. And for that, they remembered him. And so, the hunters followed. They wore black faces hidden behind iron masks polished to reflect the flames they carried. They rode under the banner of the holy flame, their arrival preceded by smoke. Fields where Elias had walked were set ablaze. Midwives who spoke of a silent monk were strung up as witches. One child was said to have seen him in a dream. He woke to find his home in cinders. This was no justice. This was theater. The church was not hunting a heretic. They were hunting a symbol. And symbols must be burned. But Elias did not die. Sku could not die, not yet. There was still one place left. Sku, one place the fire had not reached. A ruined abbey, swallowed by ivy and time. Once holy, once his. It was there beneath the altar where saints once wept and light once fell through stained glass. That brother Thomas lay buried. Thomas, who had held Elias's trembling hand when the first brother fell. Thomas, who had whispered, "Stay with me," as the others died screaming. Thomas, who had said before the fever took him, "You are not alone." Elias had carried him down into the crypt. He had wept until his throat tore, and in that silence something had cracked inside him, something that never healed. Now the wind shifts. Elias turns. Kay is thinner than shadow, his beard matted with moss, his eyes like hollow coins. Behind him, far beyond the hills, a sound. Rises again, a bell. But not for mass, not for mourning. For the hunt, and yet he walks on. Toward the place where the bones of the past still sleep beneath stone. Toward the ruin that once was sanctuary. He does not quicken his pace. Come, let them see what remains of a man who buried saints and survived the plague. Let them ring their hollow bell, for Elias no longer fears fire. He has already walked through hell, and in the crypt below, the dead are waiting. The ruins speak louder at night. Cracks in the stone echo with sighs. Beneath Elias' bare feet, the flagstones whisper of liturgies once chanted, of wine spilled during vigil, of secrets folded into shadow. The wind moves through broken arches, like a widow through her husband's bedchamber, softly, slowly, with mourning in every step. Elias enters the sanctuary without a torch. He does not need one. He knows every inch of this place. Even in ruin, it remembers him. Each wall bears the scent of his hands, once young and clean, once calloused from prayer and mortar work. Here he had knelt as a novice, trembling under Brother Thomas's hand. Here he had sung the lament of Job by candlelight. And here he had stood alone, anointing the altar with oil while the rest of the world burned. Now the altar is cold, split. The marble has cracked and ivy grows through its bones. But beneath it, behind a small hidden hatch, lies the crypt. Elias pauses. His fingers tremble as they touch the carved panel. One last time, he must feel the design. The thorn-crowned lamb, its face half-worn by centuries of reverent hands. A symbol of salvation. Chris's his palm to it. It groans and opens. Dust rises like incense. He descends the narrow steps, slowly, carefully. Each creak of ancient wood beneath his weight sounds like the cracking of memory. It is not fear that grips him, but reverence. The air is thick, moist, old, the scent of stone and ash, and beneath it all, the unmistakable metallic temps of something deeper. He carries no candle, but the darkness welcomes him like an old friend. This is not a tomb to Elias, it is a chapel of grief. And below, beneath the last steps, lie the ones who died before the dying began. The ones who did not see the plague, who did not suffer its harvest. They rest in silence, their stone sarcophagi stacked like prayer books. No fire touched them, no rats defiled them. And in the last alcove, a simple slab, Brother Thomas. No epitaph, no gold. Just the faded remnants of a carved cross, the arms broken from time. Elias sinks to his knees. He does not weep, not with tears. The sound that escapes him is older than weeping. A gasp, a groan. Like a breath held for years, finally exhaled. He leans his forehead against the slab, and then he speaks. Forgive me, the silence answers. I could not stay. Not after the screaming. Not after the flames. I ran, his voice cracks. I tried, Thomas. I tried to save them. I wrote what I saw. I studied every blister, every boil, every child that coughed blood-eyed, tried to make it mean something. I thought if I could understand it, it would stop. He lays the herb book beside the stone, bound in blackened leather, pages crumbling. I saw it in dreams before it ever came. The black wind. The eyes with no light. I thought they were visions, punishments for doubt. But they were warnings. He looks around the crypt, the shadows pressing in. I was the last. I am the last. His fingers brush the slab again, and this time he lays upon it a sprig of thyme, the same one from the ruined garden above. It still grows. He almost smiles. I don't know if it's hope or defiance, but something still grows. A faint scraping sound behind him. He freezes. He does not rise. The sound grows louder, wood against stone. A breath, not wind, not memory. Something alive. He turns slowly. There is nothing. But then something flickers. A pale shimmer near. The stairs, faint as moonlight on water. A figure. Elias does not move. He knows better than to speak to the dead. The figure does not speak either. It stands still, hands folded. A robe like ash draped over shoulders too thin to belong to a living man. Thomas? No, not quite. The face is blurred as if seen through tears, but the presence is familiar. And then it fades, as softly as it came. The crypt falls silent once more. Elias closes his eyes, is not surprised. This place remembers. The dead are never truly gone here. They whisper through the mortar, hum in the damp, breathe in the hollows of the stones. But not all ghosts are kind. Some remember betrayal, some remember fire, and some remember him. He stands. Above, beyond the shattered cloisters, the church bells have stopped tolling. But a new sound rises. Boots, iron, dogs barking, far off. The Inquisition. They've found the trail. Elias turns back to the slab. One last time, he presses his forehead to the stone. Watch over me, Thomas. Then he climbs. Not fast. Not like prey. But like a monk leaving matins, steady, quiet, with purpose. He reaches the ruined garden as the sun breaks through the mist at last, and light floods the crumbling abbey. He lifts his face. The warmth stings his skin. The warmth feels foreign now. He closes the hatch behind him, covers it with stone, then with time. Let them come, let them search. They will not find Thomas. Not here, not yet. And as Elias turns to face the rising sun and the storm it carries with it, he breathes deep hand, does not flinch. Because he knows now the dead beneath the altar are not alone, and neither is he. The forest at the edge of the monastery had once been a sanctuary, a place where novices walked in silence, where birdsong filled the space between prayers, where the veil of the world thinned, and a monk might imagine he heard the voice of God. In the rustling of leaves, now it is a net of thorns and silence. And the voice that moves through it belongs not to God, but to the hound. Elias crouches low beneath a blackthorn bush, his robe streaked with earth, his breath shallow. He watches the path, dust rises, boots appear, 6 men. Iron-clad robes of black and crimson, and at their head him, the Inquisitor, tall as a tower bell and colder than its iron. His name is not spoken here, not in whispers, not in prayer. He is a man who believes faith is forged in fire, a man who has burned libraries and kissed the ashes. He walks like a man who owns the wind, eyes pale, unblinking, not out of cruelty, but conviction. To him, monks like Elias are not heretics. They are broken instruments. And he is God's blacksmith. Behind him, the hound sniffs the air. Its coat is the color of dried blood, its eyes milky with rot. It's a creature no longer wholly of this world. The forest does not welcome them. The birds fall silent. Even the insects retreat. The leaves seem to curl inward as if recoiling, But the Inquisitor feels no fear, only certainty. He pauses, bends to the ground, brushes his gauntlet against the crushed time. He lifts it to his nose, smells memory. They were here, he says. His voice is quiet, not loud, not cruel, but final. One of the younger soldiers shifts uncomfortably. Only Herb's father. No prince. The Inquisitor does not look at him. He looks toward the monastery's bones rising from the green like the ribs of a dead beast. No one returns to a tomb unless something waits within it. He turns to the others. Burn the western wing. Salt the altar. Leave no door closed. Then he walks toward the abbey. Each step echoes centuries of judgment. Elias watches. From the thorns still as stone, his body aches to run. But monks are not trained to flee. They are trained to endure. Closes his eyes, listens. The flames begin, a torch tossed through a shattered window. The old wood surrenders easily. It has been waiting to burn. The smoke is thick and oily, like the breath of the past rising. To accuse the living, Elias slips deeper into the forest. Each step is a prayer, not to be spared, but to be guided. He does not know where he's going, only that he cannot remain. Behind him, the abbey screams. Not with voices, but with cracking beams, falling stones, the last breath of a sanctuary consumed. The Inquisitor watches it burn without flinching, but when the first cinders catch the ivy near the altar, he frowns. Kay moves to it, pushes aside. The vines sees something strange, a sprig of thyme, fresh, green, alive. It does not wither in the smoke. He kneels, touches it, then beneath its stone, out of place. He removes it, finds the hatch. He signals the hound. Down they go, into the crypt, but Elias is already gone, hours ahead. Led by silence, shielded by memory. But the Inquisitor finds what he needs. Not Elias, not the ghost, but the book. The one Elias left by Thomas's grave. He lifts it. The pages tremble. The bindings bleed dark dust. It is not a book of scripture. It is a ledger of the plague. Drawings of sores, notes on symptoms, names crossed out in red, villages mapped. In black ink, each marked by a symbol resembling an eye. The Inquisitor reads in silence. One line makes him pause. The sickness does not begin with a rat, nor the air, but the soul. It is grief incarnate. The body only follows. He closes the book, gently, then looks up at the cracked stone cross above Brother Thomas's tomb. He says nothing, but something hardens in his face. A decision, the kind from which there is no return. Meanwhile, Elias crosses the old Roman road, far from the monastery. The wind carries the scent of cinders. He knows what it means. He does not weep, only lowers his head. They are chasing not a man, he thinks, but a memory. It's a wound. They want to burn what they do not understand. And what he carries, they would call blasphemy. But he knows better. He knows what he saw in the eyes of the dying. He knows what waited behind the fevered veil. The plague was not just disease. It was a whisper, a calling, and something heard it. Elias walked for 3 days without meeting another soul. The land had turned to ash and absence. Farms lay empty, fences broken, the last footprints blurred by wind and time. The wheat had grown wild and harvested swaying like ghosts in mourning. Trees stretched their arms heavenward but bore no fruit. Even the birds circled higher now, as if they feared to touch the earth. By the 4th evening, Elias reached a village, or what had once been one. There were no cries of children, no clatter of pots, no smoke curling from chimneys. Just silence. A silence so complete it pressed against his ribs. The gates were open, not broken, just open. As if someone had left them so intentionally for whoever might come next. Or perhaps for something they hoped would never return. He stepped through, The sign above the gate had once read St. Bartholomew's Hollow, but half the letters were gone, as if they'd fallen off in surrender. Inside, he passed a chapel. The bell tower was missing its bell. Only a length of frayed rope hung like a noose in the wind. Elias paused, knelt, whispered a blessing into the dust, then stood again. He moved slowly through the village past doors that hung ajar, beds still made, tables still set with cracked bowls. The world had ended mid-sentence. It wasn't the first village he'd seen like this, but something about this one, it felt watched, as if the stones themselves remembered. He found shelter in the old infirmary. Its windows had been painted with soot long ago in hopes of sealing in the breath of the sick. But the paint had cracked and the breath had long since fled. Inside, he found rows of cots. Most were empty, but 3 were not. The bodies had not rotted. They had simply paused, as if death had touched them gently, asking them to sleep a little longer. Elias did not look away. He did not recoil. He sat between them, folded his legs, and prayed. He did not pray for their souls. He knew where they had gone. He prayed for the living, for the ones who would come after, for the ones still running. From shadows with no names, as night settled, the wind began to sing through the cracks in the infirmary walls. Sounded like weeping. Elias closed his eyes and dreamed. In the dream, he stood in the middle of the village. But it was not empty. It was alive. Children ran past him laughing. A blacksmith raised his hammer. A woman hung linens from a line and smiled at him. Brother Thomas stood by the well, but his face was pale. His lips cracked as if he'd swallowed salt. He reached out a trembling hand. Elias, he whispered. They're coming. Elias stepped forward. Who? The ones who walk after fire? Elias felt the earth shake beneath his feet. He looked to the sky. It was no longer blue, it was red. Bleeding at the edges, from the horizon, the Inquisitor came walking. Alone, but with every step, the ground behind him blackened. Buildings crumbled. Children vanished like smoke. Only the bell rope remained, twisting in the wind, and it began to toll, though there was no bell. Elias awoke with a start. It's fine. The infirmary was still dark, but he was no longer alone. Someone was breathing. He turned. A figure sat across the room. Small, wrapped in a tattered blanket, eyes wide in the moonlight. A child. She said nothing, only stared. Her face was hollow from hunger, but her gaze was older than her years. Elias moved slowly, kneeling. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. He placed his hand over his chest. "I am Elias. I came from the Abbey." Still, she didn't speak, but her eyes flicked toward a small bundle beside her. Wrapped in cloth, Elias reached out. She led him. Inside was a book, not written by monks, but by a midwife. Handwritten records, names, dates, symptoms, all ending with a single word: bleeding. The ink had turned brown, as if it too had bled. Elias turned the last page and found a note. Out. One sentence. It began in the well. Elias rose, crossed the room, stepped out into the night. The moon hung low, bloated and bruised. He made his way to the well. Its stones were slick with moss. Its cover had been torn away. He peered in. Only darkness. And then a sound. Dripping. Soft, steady. He leaned closer. The drip grew louder, then stopped, and was replaced by breathing from deep within the well. Like lungs the size of the earth. Something exhaled. Elias staggered back, clutched the girl's book to his chest. The plague hadn't come from the air, nor the rats, nor the sea. It had come from something deeper, something buried. And it had not yet finished speaking. The girl slept as dawn broke a thin, pale gold that touched only the edges of ruin. Elias stood before the well again. It no longer looked like stone and water. It looked like a mouth, one that had swallowed 1,000 names and never spoken. them back. He held the book in his hand, the midwife's ledger, stained with ink and time. It began in the well. He did not know if what stirred below was of this world or the next. But he had walked too far, lost too many to turn away now. With a last glance at the sleeping child, Elias tied a torch to a splintered beam, wound a rope around his waist, and began to descend. The mouth of the well swallowed him whole. It was not water that waited below, it was stone. And a stairwell, cut into the earth, ancient, forgotten. The walls bled with moisture. Moss clung to the stone like diseased skin. Elias moved downward one step at a time. The torchlight danced wildly on the walls, illuminating faded carvings, symbols not found. In any monk's book, spirals eyes, open hands with missing fingers. He descended for what felt like hours. The air grew warm, wet. It smelled not of death, but of memory. Old, sour, alive. At last, he reached a chamber, circular, carved from the earth itself. In its center, a pool, still perfect and blacker than the inside of a coffin. The air buzzed, not with flies, but with a sound deeper than hearing. A hum inside the bones. Elias knelt beside the pool. His reflection looked back at him, but it was not alone. Beside his face, another. The inquisitor eyes closed, floating beneath the surface. But when Elias touched the water, he vanished. Only the monk remained. Ripples spread. And then a voice spoke, not from the air, but from the water. From beneath it, from within it. You remember me? Elias's breath caught. He did not speak. The voice continued. I have waited for you. Since the first bell fell. Since the first child coughed. Since the first crow flew west. The water began to churn. Images rose from its surface like oil and smoke. The abbey in flames. Brother Thomas gasping. The dead in rows. The girl with ancient eyes. Do you know what I am, monk? Elias whispered. No, you do. You knew me when your mother wept. You knew me when you first read Job. You knew me when silence answered your prayers. I am what follows faith. Elias stood, his torch trembling. You are not God. No, nor the devil. No, then what are you? I am the echo of what? Of everything you buried in the name of holiness. The voice was neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. The pool began to glow dimly, like breath behind frosted glass. And from its center, something rose. Not a beast, not a man. A figure woven from memory. Rags, ash, and bells. Small bells, rusted, tied along its limbs. They did not ring. They whispered. Each step it took released a name. Each movement a confession. It reached Elias and held out its hand. Take me with you. Where? To the world above. Why? Because they no longer remember. What? The cost. Elias felt his knees weaken, but he did not fall. Okay? He stared into the creature's face. There was no mouth, only eyes, and behind them, mirrors. And behind, the mirrors himself. He took its hand, and as he did, the water surged upward not in violence, but in release. The chamber cracked, the carvings glowed, and the stairwell shook with a sound like thunder held in prayer. Elias turned and began the climb. But now he was not alone. Behind him, the thing followed, silent, carrying all the names of the dead, all the stories untold, all the bells that had never been rung. When he emerged, the girl was waiting. She looked at the figure behind him and did not flinch. I heard it, she said. I heard it call. Elias nodded. Do you still want to come with me? He asked her. She looked to the horizon where the world was not yet broken, just wounded, and whispered yes. Together, the monk, the girl, and the echo of the plague walked into the light. They walked for 3 days under a sky that refused to forget. The monk, the girl, and the thing with no name. The creature moved without sound, its shadow trailing behind like spilled ink. Villages passed, some empty, others rotting in memory. And then, on the fourth morning, they reached the gates of Vetra, the city that had once exiled Elias. The bells of its cathedral still rang, but they sounded like knives now, not summoning the faithful, warning them. The guards at the gates stared as the trio approached. A girl in rags, a monk with a scorched cross, and something their minds refused to see clearly. They tried to speak, but their tongues clung to their teeth. Fear did what swords could not tit. Silenced the sentinels. The gates opened, not by command, but by some old forgotten terror, the kind carved into a city's bones. Vetra had not escaped the plague. It had simply hidden it better. The streets were cleaner than the outer lands, but the eyes were not. They were hollow. It's too clean, too quiet. The markets whispered instead. Alv shouted. The children didn't run. They watched. From behind shutters and prayers, Elias moved through them like a shadow re-entering its body. He passed the old apothecary, burnt. He passed the well where he'd once baptized 2 sons of a noblewoman. Dry, he passed the monastery, where he'd taken his vows. Boarded, his city had not died. It had calcified, hollowed. A corpse held upright. By money and denial. In the plaza, the Inquisitor waited. Draped in white as if ash could be mistaken for light. He had not aged, but something in his mouth had curled. A bitterness, perhaps even shame, perhaps not. He looked at Elias and the girl and the third figure behind them, but he spoke only to the monk. You were supposed to be gone. Elias nodded. I was, and yet you've returned with that. He could not look at the third. The bells on its limbs whispered his name. The girl stepped forward, her voice steady. She hears the dead, Elias said. She sees what they remember. The Inquisitor sneered. Then she is a threat. She is a mirror. Around them, the crowd thickened. Not with welcome, with fear. And something sharper. Curiosity. Elias raised the old ledger, the midwife's book. The list of all children taken, all names erased. He opened it and read aloud. 1 by 1, 100 names. Then 200. Then more. Each one a candle in the city's throat. Each name a nail in the cathedral's door. The Inquisitor shouted, You bring division. Elias replied, No, I bring memory. You speak of the past. I speak of the cost. Faith must protect the people. Faith must confess first. The girl turned toward the people. She didn't speak, she just stared. And in her eyes they saw it, their own children, the ones who had vanished, the ones whose deaths had been blamed on sin, or strangers, or fate. They saw, too, the creature behind her and understood. Was not here to punish, it was here to remind. Each movement of its limbs rang with their own guilt. And in that plaza, under the gaze of cathedral and crowd, the silence cracked. A woman screamed, not in horror, in recognition. Then another. A man fell to his knees. Another wept. And the city of thorns bloomed with the sound of mourning. The Inquisitor drew his blade. Walk toward Elias. You will not undo all we've built, he hissed. Elias stepped forward. And for the first time in years, the monk did not tremble. He reached for the creature's hand. Together, they touched the earth. And from it rose, not fire, not ruin, but truth. The stones of Vetra began to whisper. Not with words, with names. Each building, each wall, spoke. The lies, washed away like dust in rain. The girl knelt, eyes glowing, hands on the stones, and the city remembered. Children taken, bodies buried without prayers, blame passed like bread at supper, and the monks who had remained silent. Elias whispered, It is not enough to survive. We must deserve to live. The Inquisitor ran. He did not get far. The gates did not open. For him, he died facing the city he once ruled. But he did not scream. He simply stared at the creature as if it held his own reflection. Perhaps it did. By dusk, Vetra had changed, not cleansed, not healed, but named. A start. The creature faded with the last bell. Its work done. Elias and the girl walked alone now, toward the west, toward the lands not yet ruined. Kor asked, "Was it enough?" Elias answered, "No, but it was the beginning. There is a place beyond Vetra where no roads meet. No path leads to it. No map remembers it. But every lost soul finds it in the end. It is a hill, bare curved like the back of a weeping mother. And on this hill stands a single bell rusted, silent but waiting. Elias had heard of it in his youth. Old tales told by dying monks. They said it was once rung by angels or demons. No one knew which. But it was said, when the world forgets what it means to be human, this bell will toll once more. Now Elias stood before it. The girl beside him, her eyes no longer glowing, her voice still, and in his hands, the book, the ledger of silence. The record of sins no one wanted to carry. The wind was different here, not cruel but heavy. As if history had draped itself over the land like a funeral cloth. Elias turned to the girl. She had no name still, but her face had changed. No longer hollow with loss, no longer bound to ghosts. She had seen enough, felt enough, suffered enough, and now. She waited for his last act. Elias approached the bell. Each step felt like a decade. His body had worn thin, threadbare as the robes he still carried. But his voice was stronger than it had ever been. He opened the book and read the final page, not aloud, to himself. It was blank, as if history waited for him to finish it. And he knew this was not the end of the story. This was the story. It was the handoff, the moment when memory becomes duty, when witness becomes warning. He looked at the bell. No rope, no clapper. Just the iron throat of something ancient and aching. He stepped inside it, curled himself within its curve, and closed his eyes. The girl watched, unmoving, unblinking, and then a wind rose, not from the ground, but from beneath time, circled the hill, whispered through the grass, lifted ashes from the soil, and the bell began to tremble, not from touch, from truth, from the weight of all that had been buried, from every name Elias had ever spoken, from every child forgotten, from every silence endured by those who had no voice. It told once, only once, but the sound traveled farther than sound should travel. It moved through cities, through forests, through ruins. It moved into graves and out of mouths. And for a moment, the world remembered itself, its scenes, its saints, its sickness, its song. And then Elias was gone. The bell stood still once more, empty, but never silent again. For those who came after the midwives, the mourners, the mothers without graves, they heard it in their hearts, and they passed the story down. There was once a monk. He walked with ghosts. He named the nameless. He burned the lie and rang the truth. And when the world forgot itself, he became the sound that would not fade. The girl grew. She took no vows. She founded no church. She carried no relics, but she remembered. And wherever she walked, the stones whispered his name, not as a savior, not as a saint, as a man who chose to speak when silence was easier, as the last monk, the first witness,